what I'm saying is that there's a stream of story within the Norse myths and sagas that is not talking about supernatural gods, but it's talking about humanoid beings who tell the people of that time that they're gods, that act like gods, that have technology and personal paranormal superpowers that make ordinary people think they're gods. There's a famous saying that any sufficiently advanced technology appears akin to magic. Have you heard that? So, you know, if somebody came from 500 years ago and saw our world now was plonked right in the middle of one of our big cities, it would seem there was a lot of magic going on. But what's in these stories are stories of what the Icelanders call athkomin, which is their word for alien, and it means come from afar. It means somebody who's not from around here. Góðan daginn, hvað fréttir? That means, what's the news? I haven't been around for a couple of weeks. I'm sorry about that. I've had some family things that happened, including something quite miraculous, which I'll tell you about eventually. Something quite personal. But it's been one of those start of early winter things where some family members have been quite ill, including myself, and I haven't stopped thinking about you guys or stopped thinking about this channel, and I haven't stopped working on my book Viking Superpowers. Actually, I've become doubly interested in it, and I have some great news. In a couple of months I'll be going to Scandinavia for the first time, doing a Viking Superpowers research tour. I'll be starting off in Denmark, going up to Sweden, across to Norway, and then to my beloved Iceland. And I'll be researching all the things that I'm talking about here, all the things that I'm discovering in the sagas and in the Eddas, all the things that have amazed, puzzled and excited me for 40 years, could even be 50. Anyway, it's a dream come true, and I just decided it was time to do it. And I've got some friends over there already that I've made through this channel who undoubtedly will be giving me great help. I've got a friend in Iceland who I've been writing to since 1979, and she's got a farm just near the area where Njál's saga happened, about the great hero Gunnar Hlithrendi and his good friend Njál and his wild sons, including Skarphéðin. So that's going to be an amazing time, and of course there'll be lots of videos coming out of that and lots of deeper research, the only sort of research you can actually do on the ground when you're in the place talking to the locals, and that's where you discover all those little secret folk stories. And one of the things I've discovered over the years of dabbling in learning languages is that so much of our world is contained in our language. So for us English speakers, the whole world tends to be whatever's in English, but there's always so much that's locked behind Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Icelandic and other languages, depending on what you're researching. But that's the thing that's happening now. My friend Paul Anthony Wallace and his friend Mauro Biglino, who I hope to become friends with eventually, two great scholars deeply going into the Hebrew language, the ancient Hebrew, somewhat into the Old Testament Greek, the New Testament Greek, and looking at the real meanings of words. And that's what I've been doing in the the Norse literature, looking at the actual words, not the translations, even though the translations help, but looking deeply into what is the real meaning of these words and what's the real story that's being told here. Which brings me to my second exciting bit of news. I really believe Viking superpowers are a real thing for us now. And I'm not just talking about Viking descendants, of which I am proud to be one, a descendant of Scandinavians, but it's for all of us humans, because we're all humans, we're all really the same beings, and we have the same innate powers that have been suppressed purposely, I think. Some of the time, these abilities that we can possibly have as humans are just ignorantly wiped away, as in the case of, I think, the majority of skeptics. I don't think they have malign intent. I think they just have a worldview that must not be upset by weirdos saying that things happen in the Viking Age, things happen in other cultures that don't fit the modern materialist worldview. But for me, Viking superpowers are something that goes back not just to the Viking Age, but they go way back, a couple of thousand years before that, back into what we normally call biblical times. So going back from, around about 1000 AD, the end of the Viking Age, back to the time of Jesus, 0 AD, back 1000, 2000, maybe 3000 years before. And my aforementioned friend Paul Anthony Wallace is as we speak, is flying to Turkey, and he's going to be deeply exploring Göbekli Tepe, and I can't remember the other new one, but that area, Anatolia, ancient Armenia. And I have sort of advised people on here to read his books, his Eden series. They're just spellbinding books, but his latest book, Invasions of Eden, I had a little hand in that as friends, and he knows I have expertise in the Viking Age. He asked me quite a few questions about the myths and sagas, the Eddas, what stories of Odin and the Aesir, who they were, who I think they were, the connection between the Aesir and what he calls the Elohim, the word that's often translated as God in the Hebrew Bible, is actually a plural word meaning the powerful ones, and it doesn't just refer to deities, but it refers to just beings of great power, and often very much not a sort of a divine, all-knowing, omnipresent God. It seems like beings that are actually here and now, or here and then on the earth, doing things that often were quite unchristian, you might say. And the Aesir of the north, I find them to be the same people, and one of the words that describes them, and I'll be speaking at in depth in my Viking Superpowers Way of Asgard first book, the words Regin, R-E-G-I-N, which means the powers. It's always translated by multiple scholarly English language translators as the powers. And the classical, according to Snorri Sturluson, the great Icelandic chieftain and historian who wrote the Eddas and who wrote Heimskringla, which in its early section has stories of the gods, the Aesir. He says that they come from Turkey. Armenia, they come from Anatolia, where Paul is at the moment. Within the sagas and the Eddas, I've found two stories. Essentially, a story of gods, as in supernatural beings that are, doing mysterious things outside the normal dimension. Stories of ancient mystical, spiritual traditions, quite difficult to understand There's some great writers writing about that. I mentioned in a previous video about a Norwegian writer, Maria Kvildhog, who's done a wonderful job, and I've got one of her big books called Seeds of Yggdrasil, and she looks right into the really ancient beliefs of the people of the North. It's all pretty full-on detective work, this stuff, because it has been suppressed, destroyed, denigrated, called the work of the devil, called children's stories, fairy tales, for 1,000 years. So we've got to sort of cut through all that mentality, and even in the scholarship we've got to cut through a lot of, I consider, false narratives, because people just don't want to give it any credibility. They just want it to be silly stories from the past, or terrible demon inspired stories from dumb pagans who didn't know the true faith. But in these stories, in the Edda, in these myths of the Vikings, there's heaps of great wisdom, and a lot of it very Viking, is very practical and down to earth. There's another stream that I've found in there that only certain people are able to see, and having been very influenced by, since I was young, since the 70s, been influenced by Eric von Daniken, even read a few of Zachariah Sitchin's books, very influenced by Paul Anthony Wallace, Mauro Biglino, Matt Lacroix. There's so many really interesting people now in the field of paleocontact, and amazing people in the field of UFO research who write really entrancing, hard to say this is rubbish books about the reality of that phenomenon, which is really the same thing. So what I'm saying is that there's a stream of story within the Norse myths and sagas that is not talking about supernatural gods, but it's talking about humanoid beings who tell the people of that time that they're gods, that act like gods, that have technology and personal paranormal superpowers that make ordinary people think they're gods. There's a famous saying that any sufficiently advanced technology appears akin to magic. Have you heard that? So, if somebody came from 500 years ago and saw our world now, was plonked right in the middle of one of our big cities, it would seem there was a lot of magic going on. But what's in these stories are stories of what the Icelanders call athkomin, which is their word for alien, and it means come from afar. It means somebody who's not from around here, and that's actually what the UFO phenomenon feels like. It feels like this is not Earth technology, this is not normal Earth technology. And on the same hand, people report meeting very, very humanoid, even sexy, even seductive beings, beautiful beings, Nordics who really sound like these Viking gods, very stereotypically blonde, tall, blue-eyed or green-eyed. So there's this stream of story that I'm finding in the sagas and the Eddas, and it's not just wishful thinking. I've got a whole theory building that is just based on reading, thinking, and I've actually come to the conclusion that the royal houses of Scandinavia, and probably of Saxony, probably the royal family of England still knows this stuff. There's a reason why they're reported to be interested in it. Snorri Sturluson in the Eddas and in Heimskringla says that these royal families came from human women, and I guess sometimes human men, mating with these Aesir, these powerful ones, these human-like beings who had this incredible power, both technological, where they could fly, and do all sorts of stuff, and I'll be getting right into that. And also personal power, personal abilities to see the future, to remote view. I could go on and on about it. It's extremely interesting, and I will be going on about it. I'm going to tell you a lot of stuff that'll be in the book, but the book, of course, will be lots of new stuff, and I'll put it all together in a way that you can read it and come to the end and go, wow, actually, Dave, I think you've convinced me. I hope I can do that. So that's pretty much the news. It's exciting. If you're in Scandinavia, maybe I'll get a chance to meet you. My initial goal is to hit the Viking Ship Museum at Roskjilde, just outside of Copenhagen. And I, of course, haven't lost my interest in just plain old garden variety Vikings, their ships, their weapons, their lifestyle, what they ate for breakfast, what they wore. I'm just not tripping on this whole paleocontact Viking stuff. I'm into the whole thing, but in my mind, the life of the pre-Christian Vikings, or at least the pre-church Vikings, was a really free and quite powerful life in a normal physical way, and also in a paranormal way, because I think they didn't have all the the wheel clamps we have. We've sort of been wheel clamped by 1,000 years of cultural imperialism that's told us you will not believe anything unless we tell you to believe it. There is no spirituality outside our version. There is no book of wisdom outside our books of wisdom. And now, in the modern era, for quite a long time, it's like, well, those books are all rubbish anyway, but you can only believe us scientists. You can believe what we can find in test tubes, what we can measure with our instruments, what we can easily document. The problem with that is that I haven't seen any scientists around here talking to me. And there's just not like a world full of scientists out there eagerly gathering information with an open mind, not closing their mind off. You don't really see that. There is lots of cool scientists now. I have a lot of time for the cool ones. Rupert Sheldrake's one of my favourites. You probably all know of him. He's a wonderful man, a really nice man too. And I'm going to interview him sometime. I really hope. We've corresponded. People like Dr. Raymond Moody, Lisa Smart, people who've really got deeply into near-death experience stories and all the stuff that's considered impossible by Wikipedia. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it at that. I'll have lots of updates coming up about Hvað fréttir. Now, it's very hard to say that, even for me, but if you want to try it, just have a go. Hvað fréttir. If you're an Icelander, you're probably thinking, oh, your accent's a little off, mate. You sound a bit Australian Icelandic. Well, that's okay with me. I'm going to Iceland. Hopefully I can knock some of the rough edges off my accent. I'll get to actually speak the language day in, day out for a couple of weeks. So that's it. I'll see you very soon.